Everybody, I'm Ann Moser. I'm education coordinator for Wisconsin Sea Grant. So that's your host today. And this is just an extraordinary opportunity for us to listen to someone who's an artist, a scientist, a really curious human being, and and a Great Lake, someone passionate about the Great Lakes. So I'm thrilled and really thankful Geo joined us today. But I'm going to turn it over to Madeline, our extraordinary education student who is in charge of this event. So take it away, Madeline.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Hello, everybody. As Anne said, my name is Madeline. I am the community education intern at Wisconsin Sea Grant here at Madison, but I'm also an artist in this year's Flow cohort. So I'm very excited to sort of meet you all. I know some of us are in the past, but yeah, excited to meet other artists. And I echo Anne's statements of Geo is just like so inspiring, really one of the best people I can think of that kind of blends these worlds of environmental science and art. Also TikTok famous, if you guys know Spooky Lake Month. You may know Geo from her yes, hello catchphrase. And I'm just excited to see the wealth of knowledge that she has to share with us tonight. Just want to mention a couple things before we turn it over to the presentation. Firstly, being that Gia will be at the Lakes and Rivers Convention as an author, so get excited for that, where we'll all be sharing our work. And then secondly, we have a little Q&A feature at the bottom. If you know how to use that with Zoom, otherwise just feel free to like drop your questions in the chat, but we are hoping to have time for that at the end. So if you think of something, feel free to put it down there. And with that, I will turn it over to Gio.
Aw, thanks, Madeline. It's okay if you guys don't know what Spooky Lake Month is. It is a little chuggy. My main audience is 25 to 35-year-old women, and if you don't fit into that category, that's okay. But if you still love Spooky Lake Month, that's also okay. But I actually started as a art teacher. I taught high school ceramics and jewelry for 5 years in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And then I went to grad school, and that was really amazing for me because I kind of took 5 years off and then went back to grad school. So if you guys are artists, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I did in grad school. I don't know why I'm emphasizing grad like that. I apologize. But talk a little bit about that and then the work that I did, which ended up snowballing into becoming TikTok famous by accident. Like the whole thing is kind of weirdly connected. So I'm going to talk about that and share my screen now. So here we go. Uh, like this? No? It's
Yeah.
kind of, no, I think I'm supposed to push that. See, that's instinct is from the, when I used to, oh God, now we're at the end. Okay, so sorry. You'd think I'd be technological savvy, but I just did the same thing. I always had to do that exact thing when I taught, which is why I always did the presenter view. Here we go. This is better.
Beautiful.
Okay, cool. I know you guys might be scared because this said the longer artist talk. I'll fly through it, don't worry, but it's kind of interesting. And if you guys are doing work about water and about science and the integration of science into your into the artwork that you're creating, I think that a lot of this will be relevant. And it's also kind of an opportunity to talk about the things that inspired me into making the work that I did. So I really moved, as I said before, I moved from Ann Arbor and moved and went to grad school in Milwaukee at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So that's where I was a grad student. I'd never lived on a Great Lake before, and this is the Milwaukee campus. And I had never done that, and I was fascinated by the fact that I was suddenly right next to Lake Michigan. Specifically, this is like an aerial view of Milwaukee. And this little guy over here, this little beach, this is called Bradford Beach. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to grad school. I had been doing work about swarms kind of randomly. Like that was the work that I made to get into grad school. That was my portfolio. And I was feeling very lost about what I wanted to make my work on for my graduate thesis. Like I had 3 years to make a huge body of work and to write a 75-page paper about that work. And I didn't know what to do. So in classic, science, my mother's a scientist. That's why my name is Geo. She's a geologist with a bad sense of humor, really quick. So in practical, like very logistic type of brain set is I said, I'll just go to the beach every day and then maybe I'll figure it out. So for 90 days, I went to Bradford Beach and I started to collect. At first, I didn't know what I was doing there. I would just walk along the beach with my dog in like the freezing cold in November. And I didn't know why I was there or what I wanted to do. But eventually I started to recognize that there was kind of these patterns on the shoreline and I was kind of interested in them. So I started to just collect things. Also, I was like, man, there's a lot of trash here. So I just started to collect the trash too and ended up with like a hoard of things, but no intention. Like I didn't know what I was going to do with those things. I wasn't going into this picturing something specific. I just decided to collect because it created a routine. It got me away from my phone for an hour. It was a good way to just have this repetition in my life and kind of this commitment. And it was an interesting year to be doing that because it was 2019 and that was when we had extremely high water on the Great Lakes. So there was kind of this really like there was fate involved a little bit, it felt like, or there was this kind of wonderful coincidence where the water was bringing a lot of junk because it was so high. So it was eating away at all the dunes and it was dropping stuff off. Now, if you go to the beach, the water's much lower. You're not going to see that type of drop off now. You still get stuff on the beach, but it wasn't as intense as it was in 2019. So I decided this was it. I was like, I'm going to do my graduate thesis about the Great Lakes. Ironically, the wonderful and amazing Dan Egan, he works at the Freshwater Sciences program in University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I read this book. And this book is also the reason I started to be like, okay, it's the Great Lakes. Like, this is what I'm going to focus on. If you get an opportunity, you should read that book. One of the quotes that I really like from it is that roughly 97% of the globe's water is saltwater. Of the 3% or so that is freshwater, most of it's locked up in the polar ice caps or trapped so far underground that it's inaccessible. Of the sliver left over that exists as surface freshwater readily available for human use, about 20% of that, 1 of every 5 gallons available on the planet, is found in the Great Lakes. So just an appreciation for just how insane they are. I always add this because I feel like there's people that don't grow up around the Great Lakes and they just don't think about what they are. But we've got Lake Superior, which flows into Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, which is technically one giant lake. Don't tell anybody that because they get mad about it. Flows into Lake Erie, flows through the Niagara Escarpment, Niagara Falls, flows through Lake Ontario, and then out through the St. Lawrence Seaway, St. Lawrence River into the Atlantic Ocean. So it contains 84% of North America's surface freshwater, which is why people always want to take it. Okay, it's very important. And if you didn't know, the Great Lakes were formed from the last ice age. There was this enormous glacier over North America. Listen, maybe you guys knew this, but just imagine like an art student who was teaching ceramics and jewelry. I hadn't really taken a geography class in like 10 years and hadn't really thought about the glaciers in 10 years. So if you guys are young, maybe it was 5 years ago, but for me, it was a long time ago. And I was like, oh my God, this glacier is crazy. This is the craziest glacier. People don't really understand either. Something I didn't understand. I always like the reason I'm doing this ever is because I'm always like, what? That's 90% of my job is being like shocked because I don't have a science degree. Is that this glacier is like 2 miles high, 3 miles high in places, and it's sliding over the earth. It accelerates and goes down into into Illinois and into Ohio and all that. It's going down and then it's coming back. And so it's scraping across the earth constantly, going back and forth and back and forth. And as a result, the Great Lakes were formed. They're very young. 12,000 years is incredibly young for a lake. The oldest lakes in the world are millions of years old. Lake Baikal, we all love it. Okay. And so the Great Lakes are babies, essentially, which means they have very delicate ecosystems because they haven't really had enough time to create these endemic ecosystems like Lake Tanganyika or Lake Baikal or the Caspian Sea. All of those ones have been around for millions of years and have these really sturdy, really complex ecosystems. Okay, so as a result, when we built the Welland Canal, which connected Lake Ontario to Lake Erie in 1930, this is when big ships started to enter into the Great Lakes. Because before they couldn't do anything, they couldn't get past the Niagara Escarpment where the Niagara Falls is. A ship can't pass Niagara Falls, right? So this is what that looks like. This is what the Welland Canal looks like. It's got locks, just like the Panama Canal. And it essentially just opened the Great Lakes up to anything that came through. Say? So back from Dan Egan, a single seaway ship can hold up to 6 million gallons of vessel steadying ballast water that gets discharged at a port in exchange for cargo. So if a ship is light and it doesn't have cargo, it needs ballast water. And if it has ballast water, then or it has cargo, then it doesn't need ballast water. So that water, scientists would learn after it was too late, can be teeming with millions, if not billions, of living organisms. Okay, here's a visual because I did not understand what this was when I was first studying it. Okay, but this is what that ballast water would look like. So there's all this like DNA in the ballast water, and it would get sucked up over near the Caspian Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. It would get sucked up near China, and they'd travel all the way to the Great Lakes, go to Duluth Harbor, and just dump it all out. And as a result, you had these little critters that just suddenly got introduced to the Great Lakes. Okay. So I was interested in the way that these little critters, they'd be like little specks, and they would multiply by billions. And since I was a printmaker, it was kind of an interesting way to show that multiplicity was to use printmaking, which is in theory, this endless ability to also produce and create and produce, just like what the invasive species themselves did. And I was doing this during the pandemic. This was like actually these prints that I was making. I lost access to the printmaking studios. And so I was just doing it in the basement with these little rubber pads, like a crazy person. I was just tapping them and whacking them and making my mom help me cut them out. And so another piece that I started to work on at the same time, along with this printmaking, are these little boats. And I would print the invasive species on the bottom, and then the water was a screen print on the inside. And then I ended up hanging this up in the studio in my master's thesis show. As you can see here, these are all little printed boats. And they're in this shape because they're being lifted over that Niagara Escarpment, right? This is the lock system kind of being represented through this installation. And it was kind of an interesting, fun piece to do because it was fun to fold all the boats. There was a lot of repetition in this piece. There was a lot of like printing it, cutting it, and then folding it and making these. I made my sisters do it, actually. I'm going to confess. I made my sisters help me with it because it was too many boats to do alone. But then the floor here is covered in sand from the beach and zebra mussels from the beach. I did bleach them in case anybody was worried about it. I was worried about it. I was like, I don't want anybody to like accidentally walk on these and then have the same thing happen again, even though I don't think that would be very likely. I still was a little paranoid about it. But as people were walking through the gallery, they'd be walking and crunching on these zebra mussels, and then they would get stuck in their shoes, and then they would walk out of the gallery with these zebra mussels, and it would end up kind of mimicking that same type of like thing that was happening, where it was the spread of these invasive species and kind of being a product of that. And that's kind of what they looked up close. I didn't fully appreciate how hard it was going to be to stitch these. So just, yeah, never mind. You guys are artists though. So you appreciate how you forget about that little detail logistically. You're like, oh, and then I'll put the boats up. And then it's like, actually, I have to sit in the gallery for hours with my mother and sew them so that we could get them and tie them, whatever. So here's like a stress indicator for the Great Lakes. I don't think this is actually up to date anymore. I think they're more stressed than what is shown here. This is like an old National Geographic image from 2017. And the stress can come from a lot of different things. Invasive species can result or like they can amplify toxic algae blooms, which can then create these anoxic zones, these toxic zones where there's no oxygen and everything dies, especially in places like that we're close to, like Green Bay. Green Bay almost every summer has an anoxic like spot. It has like it's like a heat rash almost, except for nothing can live there. So if we're going to talk about like those ecosystems and the animals that are here, there's 3 specific fish for the Great Lakes that are really interesting. Okay. And I love talking about these fish, even though they destroy the Great Lakes. I still think they're so fascinating. Okay. And it started with, well, actually, no, let me back up. The lake trout is the one native fish in the Great Lakes that's really important to the Great Lakes. It can grow up to 70 pounds. It lives for decades. Like, imagine what this place looked like for Native Americans who are living here. Like, these trout would have been monsters in the Great Lakes. It would have been so amazing to witness that. We don't really see that anymore. And that's because we had the invasion of, oh yeah, look at these giant lake trout. So impressive. Sometimes I forget that I was like, I'm going to add lots of pictures of fish into this PowerPoint. Great. And that's because of the sea lamprey. Don't you love this little guy? He's just so like, he's just so weird. And like, how did you do this, Mother Nature? Why'd you create a lawnmower fish? I just don't understand it. It's just fascinating to me. And so this little guy, this is a sea lamprey, and what it would do is it latch on to the side of a lake trout and suck its guts out, and it would like also poison it at the same time, and it just was absolutely terrible for the lake trout population. So these fish are like, I'm talking about billions of sea lamprey all over Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. Lake Superior usually gets a little bit more relief because it has more of the frozen winters, but it was still a problem across the lake. So look at this little guy. Isn't he so cute? Look at that. Oh, love it. Love these little guys. So this is a Aldo Leopold quote. A thing is right when it tends to promote the integrity, beauty, and stability of a biotic community. Listen, if you want to make art about environmental topics or about nature, then you should go check out Aldo Leopold. Go read his works. And he's actually from Wisconsin. So it's kind of a cool thing. You could find a lot of inspiration from him. It is wrong when it tends to otherwise. So like the invasive species are a great example of like just completely wreaking havoc on the Great Lakes. Fun fact, how do we get rid of the sea lamprey? I know you think that the sea lamprey just vanished all by itself. Absolutely not. We dumped lampricide, it's actually called that, into our waterways and tributaries to kill all the baby lamprey. So lampreys kind of stopped being a problem for us. But don't worry, now we get to worry about the alewives. Alewives are like a little prey fish. They're about this big. Actually, a couple years ago, did you guys see them on the beaches? There was a resurgence a couple years ago. I'd say in 2022, there was thousands of these on the shores because I try to go to the beaches every year just to kind of keep track of what's going on because there's these different waves that are occurring. So this prey fish, just imagine being in Chicago. There's billions of them washing up and rotting on the shorelines. It's kind of this fascinating kind of thing that's happening, and they're bulldozing it. They had to bring bulldozers to the beach just to remove all the dead fish. Because what's happening with I gave away the little thing really quick, but anyway, what's happening with these fish is that they're suddenly in this huge open wide space where there's all this food for them. So they start to overpopulate, and then suddenly they've kind of destroyed their own little food pyramid where there's not enough food for them, so they start to die off. But we still, humans are inherently interested in being involved in this type of thing. They're like, we got to like get involved because this is ruining the sport fish. Was like people were upset because sport fish were starting to disappear. Hey, listen, the fishermen, you got to go through those guys. They're invested. They're invested on what happens to these types of waterways. So what did we do? We introduced salmon to the Great Lakes. And there was this interesting philosophy. They were like, well, it'll be fine. Like the salmon won't know where to go home. So they'll never reproduce. We'll just, introduce the salmon and then they won't reproduce and it'll be great. And of course, that's not how it works because nature is nature, and the salmon figured out how to reproduce and they overpopulated themselves. But another thing that was kind of interesting is that we still to this day introduce salmon into the Great Lakes every year. So that we're dropping baby salmon into the Great Lakes all the time because of sport fishing, and also because of this like attempt to create balance. It's like a constant back and forth with the balance. Yeah, see, all the fishermen, they were so excited about the Great Lakes salmon. And then last but not least after the alewives came the quagga mussels. So the quagga mussels or the zebra mussels is where it actually started. So Dan Egan again, sandy beaches still rim the lakes, but if Lake Michigan, for example, were drained, it would now be possible to walk almost the entire 100 miles between Milwaukee and Muskegon on a bed of trillions upon trillions of filter feeding quagga mussels. Okay. Just to confuse you a little bit, I say zebra and quagga kind of interchangeably, but there's one very important difference between the two is that zebra mussels came first, but they can only attach and breed and filter on rock. Quagga, smaller, you could say cuter, I would disagree with you, they only attach to sand, and the Great Lakes are basically all sandy bottoms. And so quagga mussels are the ones who kind of came in. So you see here in 1994, the zebra mussel density is on the left. The quagga mussel density is in the middle. There are none yet. And on the right, you have the zooplankton density. Zooplankton are all the little guys at the bottom of the food chain that support the entire ecosystem. And filter feeding mussels are sucking water in, and they're sucking in zooplankton, and they're eating it up, and they're spitting out all the bad stuff. So all that toxic algae, they're sucking it up and they're spitting it out, right? All of those, like botulism is sucking it in and spitting it out. So that's kind of what's happening. So they're taking all the good stuff and they're spitting out all the bad stuff, right? And so you can kind of see here, zebra mussels are like hardcore right along the edges, especially, and then the quagga mussels pop in. And then you kind of see this density occur with the quagga mussels. Now, the interesting thing is we never did anything for the quagga mussels specifically. We didn't dump anything into the waters. They just overpopulated themselves. So they kind of go through these cycles like all of these do. All of these fish, everything on any invasive species is going to go through a cycle where it overpopulates because it's like a dominator in this new environment. And then it overpopulates and dies and then kind of reestablishes. And then eventually, theoretically, give this a couple thousand years and it would all work itself out. The problem is that that's not how human timelines work. So we're always trying to we're messing with this system constantly. So here's how tiny they are. I feel like I didn't really understand that. And this guy here is holding there used to be these big, beautiful freshwater clams in the Great Lakes. We don't really see them as much anymore. Anytime I find a piece of a freshwater clam, though, on the Great Lakes, on the beaches, I always get really excited because they're so rare now. So you can kind of see those two there. And they're really bad. We're like trying to prevent them from traveling all across the United States. Like Lake Tahoe is like terrified of zebra mussels, right? Now, Lake Tahoe doesn't have to worry about it as much because it gets really cold in the winter, but all of these lakes in like Texas, in the lower states, they don't want to deal with it because the small populations the populations of these lakes and rivers would be destroyed by this type of influx. If you wonder what's happening, I know that bird flu is like a big thing, but have you ever remember those headlines where all of the birds of the Great Lakes were dying from botulism, all these loons and stuff? So that's actually connected yet again to the zebra and quagga mussels. Remember a few years ago too, when we were able to see all the shipwrecks from above? Oh my God, this is so exciting. It's actually a bad sign. If you have water that's that clear, it's because the zebra and quagga mussels are cleaning it. And then as a result, you have this sunlight that's coming to the bottom of the lake and it's producing the toxic algae, which is then what drops to the bottom. The birds dive into the bottom and they eat all that toxic algae, which also has botulism in it. And then you end up with this. Oh, but do you want to know about the whitefish butthole? I know you want to know about the whitefish butthole. It's not actually in this PowerPoint. I'm going to take a tiny tangent. One tiny silver lining to this kind of thing happening and a reminder that nature will always prevail if you just give her time is that when the quagga and zebra mussels came in, the whitefish started to lose their food source. And they were like, well, this kind of sucks. So they're like, well, what if we eat the zebra and quagga mussels? So these whitefish suddenly had this instantaneous mutation over just a few generations, where originally when they would eat the zebra and quagga mussels, it would like shred their butthole. Like they'd be trying to poop out these like little shells and their butthole would get all ripped up and it would like hurt them and then they would die earlier or faster or more easily from infection. And instead the butthole was like, I'm going to fix this. And within just a few generations, now the butthole's like nice and ready to deal with all of the shells that kind of get spit out. So yet again, like mutations in nature will heal if you just give it time and adjust. So I know that was a lot of information, but I just wanted to give context for the work that I started to do, thinking about these three fish. These three fish were kind of at the core of the problems that the Great Lakes faced. They were the history of the Great Lakes. They were everything that had occurred with the Great Lakes kind of in this little story. Now, there's tons of other little critters, like there's like the spiny water flea. There's Asian carp that are like being held back by like a single electric fence in Chicago. Do you guys know about the electric fence in Chicago? There's an electric fence in the water in Chicago that's like trying to hold back an entire invasive species. Now, I always tell people, don't actually worry too much about the invasive Asian carp because there's no nutrients in the Great Lakes anyway. So what are they going to do? They're not going to be able to really do anything. There's more nutrients in the rivers than there are in the lakes currently, unfortunately. So, and then like this guy down here is the spiny water flea. So I was kind of interested in this relationship between these different things, and using printmaking, I was able to make all these prints and then just play with them, cut them up and play with them. I made my mom cut them up yet again. I'm a terrible person. She's retired. Okay. The woman is bored. She needs entertainment. Make her cut them up. It's very happy. So it's kind of a fun way to explore like these these snails here are like also an invasive species. This plant here is an invasive species. These are all kind of invasive species. And then our native animals that we're trying to protect, and kind of exploring that relationship between them. So it's kind of fun way to kind of think about the history and how do I tell that story to an audience, and how do I communicate that? These three, it's kind of hard to tell, but they're huge. They're like these enormous kind of compilations that kind of bred from that interest in those pieces that I was working on. They're actually permanently at the Milwaukee Community College now. So it's kind of fun. So anyway, this is not necessarily up to date because it's kind of every change. I see the whitefish are eating the mussels. I did include it in the PowerPoint at one point or another because I always like to talk about the buttholes. But there's a 90% drop in phytoplankton. We're seeing, I mean, you guys have seen the headlines. We always have this problem with toxic algae in the Great Lakes, and we still have a problem with quagga mussels. So silver lining, like, you know, Dan Egan always talks about in his book, if you ever want to read it and you have a little bit of like climate change, eco fear, like sometimes I don't want to know. Keep that thing away from me. I don't want to know about it. Dan Egan's book is very thoughtful, and he has this like silver lining at the end, which is what I'm saying, which is nature heals. She comes back, she figures it out, she finds balance. That's like all of nature over time has figured that out. So it's just hard for us because we are these little mayflies in the geological timeline, but really, if you just give it time, it'll figure itself out. And then maybe one day we'll have seals. Just kidding. Baikal, right? Wouldn't we wish to have some ancient seals? Yes, yes, yes. So I want to talk a little bit about going to the beach. These are some of this is a Warby Parker box. I was very consistent. I didn't have anything fancy. I just walked to the beach and brought something to collect stuff in. And I still have all of that trash here in my studio. We're going to skip this little video because it's just me finding stuff. And I'm going to take a little side quest. How are we doing on time, Madeline? Are we doing okay? I ramble.
Yeah. No, you're doing great. We still have to.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to take a little tiny side quest into artist books because it'll explain the next part of my presentation and where I was going. And it actually weirdly leads into TikTok. So have you guys anybody done artist books? Anybody? Yeah, maybe. Okay. Well, I had no idea what an artist book was when I started at Milwaukee. I had never thought about it. I knew accordion books. I knew what like those little zines were, but I'd never thought about an artist book as an art object. Now, what I find interesting about artist books in a world where like the history of painting, if you paint and you want to be a painter, you are dealing with the history of painting. You have to confront the fact that you are part of this like enormous line of painting. But artist books are kind of interesting because they're really bred this is an oversimplification. Max Yella at the university would yell at me for saying this, but I think artist books are bred from the invention of the internet. Like, I feel like artist books are a result of the fact that we no longer need physical books. And because we no longer need them, we're now fascinated with them as an object, right? Now, you can fight me on that. I know that capitalism is trying to convince you that you need 6 different copies of the sprayed edge ACOTAR. That's fine. You can still have that, okay? But in theory, we are living in as the future kind of moves forward, we no longer need books in the way that we used to. So now we're fetishizing it a little bit. Maybe fetishize is not the right word, but you know what I mean. So artist books are books or book-like objects over which the final appearance an artist has a high degree of control. The artist or the book is intended as a work of art. Okay. So this is different than an art book or a photo book or a coffee table book. This is not the same thing. Okay. While artist books can take many forms, there are a few elements that are common across the practice. Understanding a book as an artwork invites a reflection into the properties of the book form itself. So you start to ask yourself, is it a book if you can't open it? Is it still a book? Is it a book if it no longer functions or it's sculpted into something else if it doesn't look like a book? Is it a book if you cut it up? Like, what point does it not become a book? Is it not a book anymore? Sometimes artist books look and feel just like books and they read like books and they everything about them is a book and you're like, I'm never going to question if this is a book or not. So this is one of my favorite artist books. This is called Smoke in My Dreams by Mark Wagner. You might actually know Mark Wagner's name because he a couple years ago he cut up a bunch of money, American money, and he made all these portraits. Same guy, he makes artist books. And this is an entire artist book about how this man wanted to quit smoking and so he decided that he was going to start dreaming about smoking. And this was the way that he was going to quit smoking, was that he was going to smoke in his dreams. And as a result, he would no longer smoke in real life. Like it was like cold turkey, but like with a caveat, right? And this is a beautiful book where it's collaged and it's letterpress printed. And a lot of these are really funny. Like in my dreams, Surgeon Generals scream warnings from cellophane straitjackets, from padded cells, from asylums across the United States. Warning, candy cigarettes may be hazardous to the health of your teeth. It's kind of quirky and fun, but it still reads like a book, right? You're still encountering it. You're turning the pages, you're reading it. Even if parts of it, like this page spread here, that don't have any specific text. In my dreams, sandcastles built themselves in institutional ashtrays. In my dreams, tobacco cities crumble into ash. I don't really need to read all of these, okay? But it's amazing. It's like my favorite book ever. This is another example. Like, is it a book if you can't really read it in a traditional way? This is a famous book where the artist made it completely out of glass. And when it's closed, you can see this portrait of a woman. And the story behind this is that the mother of this woman died when she was really young, and the family decided to never talk about her. The family decided that they were just never going to acknowledge her mother, and they removed all the photographs of her, and they never spoke of her. So when she grew up and she wanted to learn about her mother, she only had photographs, and she didn't know anything about this woman, nothing, not a single thing. And so this book communicates that because as you open it, you only have this photograph. So as you try to access the information, as you try to open this book and to reveal and to read, you're suddenly losing that information, right? It's being kind of taken away from you. It's what did Max say? Max said it was like biblio Alzheimer's, right? Is it a book if there's no spine or, no pages? Is it a book if you open it, reveal it, and uncover information? This book is actually the one that inspired my book that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. This is called The Pharmacy of Crippling Hope by Jessica Poor. She's a Wisconsin artist. I'm sorry, it's a little triggering, so I apologize. It's a little aggressive. But take 1 or 2 tablets by mouth, take as many as you want, you're still going to die. And then the tablets are pieces of paper rolled up, and they're just bad advice. Things you should not do. Run with scissors, join a cult, don't floss your teeth. Nothing too dramatic, but just like bad advice. Things that people always say, don't run with scissors. And she has that as a piece in there. So it's kind of interesting. She's like a weird artist who explores the concept of book in a really interesting way. And there's a lot of artists that do that. I'm kind of blowing through these because I obviously left too many in there. So as a result, Max, when I took this class with Max, he had me experimenting. He was like, Geo, make a book about aura. And I was like, what the hell is aura? What does that even mean? He was like, make a book about time. And I was like, well, what does that mean? This was a book about my mother who had scoliosis. This is not a very good image because I tried to do a transfer and it didn't work. But this is her in her giant body cast when she had her spine was fused to her hips when she was in 1960. And if you kind of open this and read the story here, this is a flag book. And then when you pull it flat, you can see a x-ray of what her spine looks like today. So there's kind of like these books were all meant to be kind of exploring the concept of book and exploring the ideas. This is the one about aura, and I covered it with zebra mussels. And then as he was opening it, all these little zebra mussels are falling on the desk. And it was kind of an interesting way to play with it. And I was trying to play with different textures and different types of books and see what happened. And all of this is about the Great Lakes. I always try to bring everything about the Great Lakes, which kind of annoyed my professor, who's like, just go try something different. I was like, no, I only want to think about bugs and invasive species, including this one, which he was like, he wanted me to think about words and how to play with words in text form. So that's what this one is, even though in the end he was like, Geo, I think you just ended up writing twat at the end here. And I was like, well, I didn't mean to. It was ballast water, obviously. Come on. As you can see from the back, ballast water. He was like distracted by the That's good to know though. You got to think about that. And then I made this book, and this is what I was going to talk about. Sorry, I know that was kind of a long lead in. My apologies. Yet again, I have no concept of time. We're doing okay. So this is what I ended up making for him when he asked me to make a book about group. Sometimes I dream about strangling Max just a little bit because I was so stressed. He would give me 1 week. He'd be like, you have 1 week to make a book about group. And I'd be like, what does group mean, Max? There is a textbook for artist books that you'd have to read if you wanted to explore it. Anyway. So I made this book, and I had these tubes actually from when I was a high school teacher, and all high school teachers are hoarders. Okay. Actually a lot of, are you artists? You're a hoarder. Okay. Most of us are. And I had hoarded these. I stole them from the high school. Don't tell anybody. And I put them in my bag when I left, and I said, these are cool and I'm going to use them one day. And I don't know why. So I just had them in my studio, and I panicked and was like, what does group even mean? And I just put a bunch of the trash from the beach into these tubes and threw it in the box, and then figured he'd hate it because it looks like a weird collection. But in fact, he enjoyed the concept of it. Oops, we're going to skip that too. He enjoyed it because this is kind of a fun play on the concept of book, right? It opens and reveals, but the story itself is kept from you. You can't actually see when you're looking at the tubes from the top, you don't really understand what's happening in the book. So then as you pull each tube out, you're slowly but surely getting this full picture of the beach. It's slowly being revealed to you over time. And as you pull out each piece, it's like a puzzle, and you starting to get understand that there's this huge interconnected network of things that can be found on the shores. And so this is the final product of that. And these are what they looked like. I ended up driving in the pandemic to Minneapolis to meet Gail on a farm in Minneapolis so that I could buy 5,000 of these moldy glass test tubes from her backyard that she had on eBay in the pandemic. It was very hectic, but now I have 5,000 of these tubes. And the rubber is kind of interesting because it's always molding, and rubber doesn't actually last, which is kind of interesting. So there's an ephemeral aspect to these tubes. But as you can see here, they're kind of a playful, wait, I'll show you some of the images. So I thought these are I think I'm so funny. Okay. I'm so funny because all of these labels were really fun. My rule was that it couldn't say the color or the object that were inside. So you kind of had to play with that a little bit. So this one's a play on the concept of erosion on the beaches. So I lied here. It's dune roots, right? It's the roots from the dunes that are holding the grass, not the. Oh, actually, no, I didn't screw it up because it's right. Okay. Dune grass, it's the roots from the dune grass, which is holding the dunes together. And people are always running on it, and it destroys them. And then they end up kind of eroding away, and eventually they'll all disappear. Have you ever seen a nurdle? I love nurdles. Nurdles are so fun. I mean, they're horrible. They're probably the worst plastic on the Great Lakes because they look like fish eggs. So all the fish and all of the animals and all the birds are like, oh my God, look at that fish egg. This is so great. And it turns out that it's trying to kill them. So this is the industrial plastic that they melt down to make all the plastic in your everyday life. This is what they start with. So they're escape artists, right? They can get out. Also, they're so fun to look for. Please, next time you go to the beach, please look for nurdles because there's something about surface tension where they come to the surface. It shuffles to the surface, and then you see these perfect little plastic nubs on the beach, and they're so fun to collect. The irony of it is that they're the best thing to collect because they're always there. They're on every beach I've ever been to, Lake Superior, Hawaii, the Baltic Sea, doesn't matter. These are on every single beach. So it's kind of fun. Only takes one. Look at that little guy. Ages 3 and up. Choking hazard. Max didn't appreciate this one, the birch ain't one. He was like, haha. And I was like, you don't know who 50 Cent is. Or who is it, Jay-Z? You don't know who Jay-Z is, Max. Okay. Toy gun. So yeah, crinoid fossils. This is also a lie. I'm running out of time, but there's something interesting about the Milwaukee beaches because they're artificial. They're not real. They brought all that sand in from Indiana and they dumped it on the shoreline because all of the Michigan or all of Wisconsin is really an escarpment. Don't get me started. The Wisconsin is actually the same escarpment that creates the Niagara Falls. It's all part of the same thing. And so that's why we don't really have natural beaches. They're all kind of unnatural, at least in Milwaukee. So it's kind of fun. Oh yeah. And then I traveled around the Great Lakes. I'm running out of time, but, and I did this
You
for
can go a few extra minutes if you need to.
No. We're doing good. I did it for all the Great Lakes, which was kind of fun because then I was able to see the difference between all the beaches. And it was so crazy how different they are, even though they're all Great Lakes beaches. It doesn't matter. Like they're crazy different. So you can appreciate, you might know which one's which here, but shallow and long, Lake Erie, deep and small, Lake Ontario, wide and shallow, Lake Huron, deep and not as deep, but Michigan, and then Lake Superior. And this one was kind of fun because of TikTok. It got sold to a museum. So now it belongs in a museum, which was bittersweet because it means no one will ever see this. I made it in the pandemic. My parents barely went through it, and then it disappeared into a museum archive and will never be touched by another human being. And it literally took me like 6 months to make it. And oh my God, don't let me, I can't think about it. It's really depressing. So I think I'm so funny. Like, look at this one. Everyone hates me. It's a Monday barrette. I'm hilarious. Okay. So you can kind of see here these different ones. So then this is the show and like what kind of came from the show and the work that I was doing. There's a lot of different work here that you can kind of see the threads through in all of these different pieces that were being made, a lot of prints as well. And then I also kind of displayed my collection in this alternative way as well. As you can see here, actually, where are these stacks? I don't know where those racks are anymore. We're skipping. And I also made this one was kind of fun because I got to like collect the sand from Lake Michigan and the water from Lake Michigan as well. So anyway, that was the work that I made in grad school that was about the Great Lakes and kind of the history behind that and why I made the decisions that I did. And yeah, I won't talk about Spooky Lakes, but Spooky Lakes is a result of the fact that I posted that book of tubes on TikTok in 2020 and it went viral because everybody was mad at me because they were like, excuse me, ma'am, that's not a book and I hate you. And I was like, great. And then I got millions of views and I rode that wave now to almost 2 million followers online where I just make content about lakes and it's kind of wild. And so, yeah, Spooky Lakes was a result of that. Yeah. Cool. So sorry that I got completely distracted talking about artist books. I apologize, but I love artist books. They're so fun to talk about.
No apologies. That is such an interesting concept, and I was intrigued that whole time. And you're right on time. Look at that. It's 6:45.
I know. I just didn't mention illustrating an entire book, but guys, we don't talk about it. We can talk about it. It was really fun.
Geo
I was
did also
pretty bad at it because I didn't know what I was doing and I've never used a graphic design program in my life. So I had to figure out how to do it all old school. So
you did it.
Yeah.
And beautifully. So please ask your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. We have 15 minutes. I mean, the Zoom's open till 7:30, but we want to respect Geo's time and your guys' time. So go ahead and ask anything you are curious about. You can unmute yourself if you want, or you could just drop it in the chat or the Q&A. But
I always love this point. It's like the awkward point where everybody's like, do I have a question? Do I feel guilty enough for this person to ask a question? Or do I just want to sit here and like writhe around in awkwardness? I'm much better at it since I taught that class and nobody ever talked to me once. And I was just alone talking to myself in a room. It's very depressing.
Well, we're going to talk. I'll ask you a question to start, and then hopefully some people will drop some in. But I think it's really interesting you talking about like the concept of like what is a book. I feel like another question I have looking at your presentation is like, what is a studio? Like, is that the beach? Is that a basement? Like, how do you define that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely ever since I took that class, I started to really ask that question about a lot of stuff I was doing. Like, what is the definition of a collage? Like, just because we see collage in this kind of retrospective artist history, it doesn't mean that you have to follow the rules. So it's kind of it essentially gives you an opportunity to rethink any work that you're doing. But a book specifically is fun because there are a set of rules that we've kind of lived with since the invention of the printing press, and we've been following those rules pretty well. And so you can think like, a book has text, a book has a spine, a book has a cover, and then how can you upend those things and kind of rethink it through? Yeah. Like I think one of the things I turned in, which I didn't show you guys, was just a bingo cage. The bingo cage, like that has all the balls in it and you turn it. So I took all the balls and I like wrapped them with words. And then it was like this, and then everything would kind of like lead out. It was like one of these books that you would have random access to. Max didn't like that one, but he didn't like anything. So
that's so interesting.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance, I know you guys are at UWM, or UW-Madison, but Max Yella. He's at Milwaukee. He's retiring soon, and he's like, it's one of those. He's like one of those gifts to education that is about to disappear, and it's so
Mm.
sad. And I took his class on artist books and his class on the history of book and printing, and it was like it changed my life. So anyway,
That's so
it's kind
cool.
of fun.
Yeah.
It's okay. I know. I this
I
is
have
this
a
is the way it always
question.
goes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just wondering, what did you study in your undergrad again? And like what was kind of the process of you deciding to go to grad school?
Yeah. So I studied art. I got a BFA and I got my certification in teaching. I taught at a kids camp in the summer. It was called Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp. It has an entire art colony. I'm kind of lying to you because I've been there for 15 years now, but in 2011 it was very influential because I got to work with all these kids and like be in these ceramic studios and I was like determined to be a teacher and I loved being a teacher. I loved being a teacher, but I'm a single woman with a dog and I flipped my house and saved $60,000 and decided to put that into grad school. Because why not? So that's what I did. I kind of decided that I did 5 years and I killed it, and maybe I should go do something else. So then I went off to grad school just for fun. And I fully expected to go back into teaching. I like fully thought I was just going to turn around and go back to high school because I loved teaching high school. So that's what I thought I was going to do. As you guys can probably tell, I'm like one of those. I'm also 6'3", so I'm like a scary person to be teaching high school. It's like very intense.
That's so cool. Thank you.
Yeah. All the work that I did in undergrad was about environmental issues as well. So I kind of was riding this wave for a long time. I've always just done stuff about environmental topics. So the Great Lakes was just another part of that, part of discovering environmental topics as my focus. So yeah.
I'm wondering from the flow students. Oh, my internet's sucky. Sorry. Oh, yeah. I'm wondering from some of the flow students, have you been as you've been working with these water professionals, have you come into any challenges that you would ask Geo about? Because each of these students are working directly with a scientist or a librarian or an art educator, or science educator. Anybody here face something they want to ask Geo about that you think she might have some insight with?
That's so cool. I would love to do that. I need scientists because I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I like always want to talk to scientists because I'm always like, is this right? When you oversimplify stuff and when you make work, you're digesting it and spitting it back out again. And as a result, sometimes you end up lying. Like you end up like creating false information through your digestion of an idea. And that's kind of an interesting problem that I ran into. It was like I wanted to communicate this, but then I end up like miscommunicating.
Yeah. I saw Angela was unmuting. I don't know if she was playing around with her.
Yeah, so I just have a hard time like trying to like incorporate my style with actually, you know, what I'm trying to say. I think that's the thing. So it's like trying to find a balance because I've never like done anything like this or like have ever even painted water before because I'm an oil painter.
Mm.
And so I'm trying to like articulate, drought and all of this, and how do I articulate that with I paint fabric, you know? So it's like, how do I do a healthy balance between both or like try to articulate that? It's a little difficult for me, but trying to get there.
So you're talking about having a style and not necessarily feeling like it's being represented through the work that you're creating on this project.
Yeah, like I don't like I have a voice, but I don't want my voice of, my artistic voice to overshadow, what the issue is that I'm trying to say.
No, that's kind of interesting. I feel like this is where I think it's important to experiment and like don't let the first thing that comes to mind be the last thing that you do. You have to kind of let these things kind of build upon, because I think you'll end up finding a piece if you kind of explore the idea and the concept and come up with some ideas that could work within that balance between the water project or the water concepts or the drought project and your personal voice in it, and just kind of keep playing with it. Eventually you'll find a place where you feel like your style is represented in the work that you're doing. But I also struggle with that because I've never necessarily had a style. I actually, one of my like imposter syndrome issues, especially with the book that I wrote and illustrated, was that guys, when I painted that book, wait, I'll show you a picture of it really quick. When I painted this book, I had actually never painted with gouache before. Like a crazy person. So like this one here, this is the lake book that I made. And I was like told my publisher so confidently, I was like, I'm gonna paint this with gouache. And they're like, Bet, you must be an experienced gouache painter with an identity and like you know how artists have like style? And I was like not one of those people. Like I just bounce all over the place. I'm like, this sounds like fun. I'm gonna do this. So it wasn't until about halfway through the book where I was like, oh, actually, I know how to paint now. But sometimes when I look at these old paintings or the ones that I did at the very beginning, I like didn't know didn't know what I was doing. I was kind of just like figuring it out as I was going. And so it's kind of mortifying in retrospect. And I didn't know anything about it, but it wasn't like later on, I really started to get it, but I never felt like I had a style. I just like whatever came out of me was my style. I wasn't trying to box myself in by having like a specific identity. I just kind of said, I like this. I like the way it looks. I like the way it feels. I'm just going to chase this until it's something that feels right. I don't know if that helped, Angela. I apologize. That's what that also reveals a lot about me as a person.
Yes, it did.
Actually,
Thank you.
Angela, could I answer your question from a water professional's point of view? I'm not sure if this would be helpful. But I worked with a talented artist a couple of years ago, and we had like these great conversations about work, what we did, and she was so curious and asked me all these questions. And then, she came back to me asking me a lot of what I wanted, how I visualized it. And, I wanted to switch it back to her to say, this is your voice, your interpretation of my work. And I feel like I'm 60 years old, and so she was looking at me like wanting to please me or whatever. But when I'm sitting in my seat, I want to see what you create out of the words that I say and the description. So, in a way, as the recipient of the artwork or the, inspiration, if you will, find your way, do what you think. I think most people that you work with will be really receptive to that. So if that works, that's my experience. I'm not sure your water professional would be the same, but
Yeah, that actually helps a lot. Thank you.
yeah, I really empower you to do that.
Cool. I feel like
I have a question quick.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was just going to ramble again.
Nope. So you said your mother was a geologist or is a geologist?
Yeah, she has a PhD in geology. Isn't that so ironic? My full name is Georgina, but I've always gone by Geo. Like my whole life, I've gone by Geo, and then it just ended up working out for me professionally. I don't know.
Nice.
So, but I was like the
So,
kind of kid that go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, has there, since you're an artist and she is a geologist, has there been like any tension, I guess you could say, whereas like, is she like stuck in like a science and math mindset and you're like in this artist mindset, and is there like ever a clash there? Or do you guys kind of work together?
It's been really interesting in the career path I'm on now because she's super involved with it. Like the other day I was writing about the Yorkshire River or technically the Strid in Yorkshire. And my mom really wanted an entire section to be about the Yorkshire Dales, which is a type of limestone pavement that exists only in the Yorkshire Dales. And it was like this big deal. And she found all these old papers that she had scrounged up about the geology of that area. And it was like oh my God, it took us like 4 hours to negotiate what was like made sense for a middle school grade kids book about rivers, because that's the second book that I'm working on right now. So I find that like for the most part, it really helps to have her, especially with what I'm doing right now, because I'm writing books about science and history. And so anything I'm writing about science, I bring it to her and I say, like, what do you think of this? Like, she's the one who's like, wants me to have an entire segment explaining the difference between magma and lava, or wants me to have an entire segment about like the water cycle. And then I don't understand it because I took science classes in college, but I was always bad at science because I failed chemistry. That's not fair, right? That's what they always tell you. You're bad at science because you failed chemistry. Bullshit. I should have taught geography. But as a result, a lot of times she'll be talking and I don't understand what she's saying. And that's actually a really important thing. Like all of you guys who are working with scientists right now and they're going off about something and you're like, wait, back up. I don't understand what the water cycle means. Okay, I know what the water cycle means. But like really, have you thought about the water cycle recently? Like think about it. And so you should ask more stupid questions to these people that you're working with. Because I ask my mom stupid questions all the time because she's a scientist and she's been working in science for a million years and she thinks about science all the time. And as a result, she doesn't really think twice when she says limestone pavement. And I'm like, Mom, pavement makes it sound like it's asphalt. Like, what are you talking about? Pavement? That's a stupid. I'm not putting that in the book. She's like, you have to put it in the book. It's an official term. And I'm like, no, it's not because I don't understand what it means. And so a lot of times I'm asking her to elaborate and to explain something so basic, something I learned in 8th grade. That means nothing. It's been 20 years. I can't remember what that thing is. So if you're intimidated by these people, you just need to start from the basics and ask them like really silly questions because that's why I have millions of followers on TikTok, is because I think an idea is interesting. I don't know anything about it. And I ask a million questions about it until it makes sense. And then I regurgitate it to this audience of people who also don't understand anything about it because they're not scientists either, So a lot of times that's what I find that is most useful about my mom is that she's like, obviously. And I'm like, not obviously, Sorry, that's not really what you asked, but it's so true. And I think it must be relevant to what you guys are doing.